Hey, what's up, guys? Hello's with Footballtalk here. We recapped the NFL draft last week, talking about the biggest winners and losers, steals and reaches, and we'll start a series of divisional breakdowns, looking at every team's draft class, talking about which picks I liked or didn't so much, how these new players will fit into the roster, and all that kind of stuff. However, in this video, I want to focus on the players that actually didn't hear their names called on any of the 3 days. Speaking of the undrafted free agents, and mentioning the players who were the best left after 7 rounds, and how they can help their teams that they have signed with since. Some of these may be due to injury concerns, poor testing numbers, or maybe even some off-field stuff that we're not aware of. Not even late round picks are secured a roster spot, but unless there are some medical or character concerns, I believe pretty much all of these 12 names that I'll be talking about will make their teams, and some may have a significant role. These last 3 years, we've called Philip Lindsay, Jacoby Myers, and Rodrigo Blankenship respectively, so let's hope we hit another couple of gems. And let's start with a few names that I think deserve to be mentioned here. First up, with Felipe Franks, the quarterback out of Arkansas, going to Atlanta. He's likely going to have a chance to sit a couple of years behind Matt Ryan. Still a very up and down player, but definitely has a lot of arm talent and athletic ability. So with the Falcons not being able to get out of the Matt Ryan contract for another couple of years, and Frank's likely having a chance to develop behind him, if Ryan plays well and they're not picking up high, they may not like a quarterback, and Franks could eventually start for them at some point. Then with Kerry Angeline, the tight end out of NC State, going to the Arizona Cardinals, and he could be kind of replacing that Dan Arnold role, who's moving on to Carolina. Nothing really that stands out about him athletically, but a very natural pass catcher, and I could see him splitting snaps with Max Williams. Then with Elijah Griffin, the cornerback out of USC, going to Buffalo, and the Bills really surprised me by not picking a corner until the 6th round, because they have kind of a weakness at that field side corner spot across from Tre'Davious White. Griffin played a lot of press coverage at USC, which is not going to do for the Bills because they're more of an off-zone team, but he displays good awareness in zone overall, and I think if he makes that roster, could be in the running for that CB2 spot. Then with Paddy Fisher, the linebacker out of Northwestern, going to Carolina, where the Panthers don't really have that inside thumping linebacker, which Fisher is, and I could see him have a role on base downs as an inside backer, and then be subbed out on 3rd downs, because that's where his weakness is, not really being able to move around in space and pick up guys out of the backfield. Charles Snowden, the hybrid outside back out of Virginia, going to Chicago, kind of a similar skill set as Leonard Floyd, definitely not as good at this point, but has some intriguing qualities. As a former basketball player who's still learning the nuances of the position, you have Marvin Wilson, the interior defensive lineman from Florida State, going to Cleveland. Wilson was looked at as a top 50 pick potentially a year ago, put up some disappointing tape in 2020, but certainly didn't expect him to go completely undrafted, because he's still a very talented player, so much natural power, and I think he'll add some quality depth to the Browns defensive interior, behind Andrew Billings as that shade nose. And then there's Drake Jackson, the center from Kentucky, going to Detroit, where I don't see him unseat Frank Ragnow anytime soon, especially after he just got a monster contract. But the Lions don't really have another true center on that roster, and may want to carry Jackson on game days to have a quality backup at the pivot. Then with Marlon Williams, the wide receiver out of UCF, going to the Houston Texans, and this may be more about the Texans losing DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller in consecutive years. They added some bodies there, but nobody really stands out outside of Brandon Cooks and a couple of the young guys, so I could easily see Williams make that roster. I like the competitiveness at the catch point and the physicality he displays with the ball in his hands. Kenny Yeboah, the tight end out of Ole Miss, going to the New York Jets, another guy who I was pretty surprised to see fall, because he offers an intriguing skill set, more of an H-back, flexed out tight end, who can have a role for the Jets. Then there's Jamie Newman, the quarterback out of Georgia, who actually didn't play a single snap for the Bulldogs, but showed some potential at Wake Forest, going to the Philadelphia Eagles. Once again, I don't really see him playing this rookie year, because they want to see what they have in Jalen Hurts, but with his big arm to push the ball down the field, and how he can hurt defenses with his legs, I think he's somebody who can stick around and have a chance to develop. Then you have Austin Watkins, the wide receiver at UAB, going to San Francisco. Another one, nothing really that stands out athletically about him, but a fairly complete receiver, excellent route runner, good hands, and I think the 49ers don't really have a lot of those outside guys on that roster. And finally, Jared Patterson, the running back out of Buffalo, going to Washington, and I kind of get why he wasn't drafted, only 5'6", 190 pounds, At that size, he's looked at as more of a scat back, which for a guy like that to not have any catches last season, that was probably troubling for teams. But the football team already has two excellent pass catching backs, so I think Patterson could be rotated in as an RB3 and offer some explosiveness in the run game for them. Also a much more powerful guy than expected that size. And with that, we're going to move on to the actual list. And we're going to stay with another running back, with Javian Hawkins out of Louisville going to the Atlanta Falcons. And I could have sworn that the Falcons would grab a running back over the first 2 days of the draft, looking at who they had in the roster, outside of Mike Davis, who they signed in free agency, but they passed on the position as a whole, and they even traded out of the pick that the Broncos used on North Carolina's Trill Williams at the top of round 2, and they didn't use any of their 6 D3 picks on improving their backfield. Atlanta was 27th in rushing yards and 31st in yards per attempt last season. Todd Gurley led the team with less than 700 yards and lacked any type of juice, ahead of Brian Hill, Edo Smith, and Quadri Olison, who missed most of his rookie campaign with an injury. So while I definitely like the Davis signing, they really needed a difference maker for Arthur Smith, coming from Derrick Henry in Tennessee, who had 500 rushing yards more himself than his whole group for the Falcons. And they might have gotten extremely lucky being able to bring in Louisville's Javian Hawkins as an undrafted free agent, who was my 11th ranked running back. He offers top tier explosiveness and long speed, coming from a wide zone based rushing attack at Louisville, but at 5'9", 195 pounds, he does not shy away from running in between the tackles either and displays some toughness. Hawkins didn't hear his name called on any of the 3 days because of some character concerns that I'm not really aware of, but if he stays clean off the field, I think he could have a major role in this offense, and unless they add another body, I could easily see him finish second in scrimmage yards in this backfield. As good as Mike Davis may be, he lacks a certain explosion and breakaway quality, and all those other guys on that Falcons roster had a chance to emerge, outside of maybe Olison, who is more of a power back anyway. So I really think Hawkins could have a major impact for them. And with that, move on to the big guys, with David Moore, the interior offensive lineman out of Grambling State, going to Chicago. The Bears' offensive line really found their stride over the second half of last season, which went in hand with David Montgomery's turnaround, going from one of the least effective runners in the league to somebody who was running over defenders on a weekly basis. And the constellation that really worked for the Bears was putting Sam Mustipher at center, Cody Whitehair moving to left guard, and Jermaine Ifedi on the right side. I believe David Moore could easily jump in at center or right guard right away, depending on where they want to play Whitehair. This 6'2", 350-pound block can move big bodies off the line in the run game, and if he can get his hands inside the chest of interior rushers, they won't get away from him anymore. There are some limitations in terms of lateral agility, and he needs better coordination between upper and lower body, but especially at center, where he doesn't have to deal with those penetrating free techniques, I really like what he presents. And if you do put him at right guard, and now you have Tevin Jenkins, the second round pick out of Oklahoma State, on that side, you have 2 maulers over there, assuming they want to keep Jenkins at his original spot that he had in college. The release of left tackle Charles Leno was certainly surprising to me, but I even like 5th round pick Larry Borum out of Missouri, although he may be better suited to play guard. So this group of 3 rookies at the very least should give them some flexibility, and outside of Leno, they can put a better 5 out there as a whole. And with that, we move to the defensive side of the ball, with Trill Williams, the cornerback out of Syracuse, going to the New Orleans Saints. Like I mentioned last week in my draft recap, I thought the Saints had a rather questionable draft overall, looking at another developmental edge defender in Houston's Peyton Turner late in the 1st round, and what to me is a pure backup quarterback in Notre Dame's Ian Book in the 4th round. I really like the Paulson Adebo pick in the 3rd, but there may be some reinforcements coming in the secondary after they already lost Janoris Jenkins in the form of undrafted free agent Trill Williams. The former Syracuse defensive back has starting experience at outside and even more so in the slot, where he shows good patience and physicality off the line, with the hip mobility and change of direction to stay attached to his receiver. In off coverage, he can get caught flat-footed at times, but the overall package at 6'2", almost 200 pounds is pretty impressive. I don't see him replacing Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as the starting slot corner anytime soon, but he could be used as a big nickel at times to match those hybrid tight ends or big-bodied inside receivers, to go with his abilities as an edge setter in the run game and to blitz from that spot. Plus, he presents position flexibility and special teams value in coverage units, which the Saints will value with a roster spot, I believe, because Williams can fill a multitude of roles and is still improving as a player. He suffered a pretty gruesome ankle injury back in 2019 and then missed a couple of games this last season. Otherwise, he would have had a chance to be picked early on day 3, I believe, and could have maybe even gone higher if he had stayed in school for another year. So I definitely think that the Saints might have gotten a steal here. With the defensive theme here, with Justin Hilliard, the linebacker out of Ohio State, going to San Francisco, it's rare that you have a team draft a quarterback in the top 3 when they have a Super Bowl level roster if fully healthy. When you go through it, if Trey Lance is ready to play sooner rather than later, I believe the sky's the limit for them. There's not really any holes to point at for them, but if there was one job that I think feels vacant, it's weak side linebacker. After they traded away Quan Alexander at the trade deadline last year, which to me was a great move to help them with the salary cap, with how much nickel that the 49ers want to play, because they have an excellent slot corner in Trill Williams, I don't think they will keep 3 linebackers on the field a whole lot anyway. But when you do try to project who will fill out that role, especially going up against teams with big personnel like the Rams and partially the Seahawks, there's nobody that really sticks out. Azeez Al-Shaair took over once they traded Quan last year, but to me he's more of a 4th linebacker and special teams ace. They signed Samson Buchan, who played outside backer in theory for the Rams, but rarely lined up off the ball. And I hope that they don't want to go with the Nathan Gary experiment, which failed the Eagles tremendously at times. So to go with a very offense-heavy draft, I believe they might have found themselves another quality contributor potentially in the UDFA market with Justin Hilliard. At Ohio State, he was kind of a hybrid outside backer whose snap count was limited due to playing behind Baron Browning. I understand why he went undrafted, because he had a torn bicep in both arms and a torn meniscus in his career, but that doesn't mean that he can't make an impact now. He displays strong hands to defeat blocks and excellent short area quickness to match backs coming out late, as you have Fred Warner sinking deep down the middle and leave that space underneath. Plus, Hilliard is a highly dependable tackler, so don't be shocked if this guy logs the 3rd most snaps among all stand-up backers for the 49ers and makes some splash plays. And NFC West that actually really needed to hit in the UDFA market was the Seattle Seahawks, and they doubled up here at wide receiver with Kate Johnson out of South Dakota State and Tamorrion Terry out of Florida State. This one almost seems unfair, after Seattle selected Western Michigan's Dwayne Eskridge with the 1st pick in the draft at 56th overall, which I didn't think was too far off value. Now they were able to bolster that wide receiver depth chart with 2 more guys that I had inside my top 25 in a deep wide receiver class. With Tamorrion Terry, they get somewhat of a DK Metcalf light, with the same negatives coming out of college, in terms of not having the greatest change of direction and most diverse route tree, but having him run those gliding routes with slants, posts, and go routes with the speed and length that he has can be very effective. Kate Johnson, on the other hand, at 6 foot, doesn't give them that same type of build or ability to play through contact, but he offers great acceleration off the line and the route running as a slot receiver, so that kind of shocked me that he didn't hear his name called at all, especially after roasting several Power 5 DBs at the Senior Bowl. He doesn't quite have the same speed as Eskridge, but you can do a lot worse for a backup, with David Moore moving on in free agency, and I'm talking about the former Seahawks receiver, not the interior offensive lineman that I just discussed with the Bears. The only guy on that roster outside of Metcalf, Eskridge, and Tyler Lockett obviously, who will probably make the active team, is last year's 7th round pick Freddie Swain, thanks to his return ability. However, I think even he could be expendable. Terry and Johnson not only offer very similar skill sets than 2 of the starters that the Seahawks have, but they also add special teams value, with Terry being an outstanding gunner on the punt team, and Johnson having averaged 26.7 yards per kick return in college, so I really thought they found some steals here. And that brings us to a final NFC team, with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers getting Sadarius Hutcherson, the interior offensive lineman out of South Carolina. The reigning Super Bowl champs had a very interesting draft, because if you look at the 5 picks ahead of the 7th round, when he grabbed a couple of special teams aces, none of those guys will likely start at any point of their rookie seasons, even though first-rounder Joe Tryon will likely be a big part of their rush packages. Jalen Darden gives them another vertical target on offense, and Robert Haynes is somebody that can probably fill in for any spot on the O-line. However, as crazy as it may sound, if everybody stays healthy, the second most likely guy to start at some point next year could be the undrafted guard Sadarius Hutcherson. the 6'4", 320-pounder, was my 15th ranked interior offensive lineman, and I thought he might have had a chance to go at the very top of day 3. He offers a nice combination of build, explosiveness out of his stance, power, anchor ability, and movement skills, to go with extended starting experience at 3 different spots against SEC competition. He's not the fleetest of foot and doesn't make use of his athletic capability at this point, but he's somebody who I believe has a future as a starter in this league with the right coaching. By extending left tackle Donovan Smith for 2 more years, the Bucs are certainly settled at 4 of the 5 starting spots and have a chance to be one of the top units up front league-wide if they can carry that momentum from their Super Bowl run. However, right guard is where they could be looking to upgrade, as Alex Kappa and Aaron Stinney are capable players but haven't really blown Tampa Bay away. I could see them potentially moving third rounder Robert Hainsey inside and maybe even put him at center, where he looked really good during Senior Bowl week, plug in Ryan Jensen at right guard if he's okay with that move. But if they stay as currently constructed, I believe Hutcherson could be in the race for the starting gig at right guard. And with that, we move on to the AFC with the guy that actually made my cover photo, Darius Washington, the safety out of TCU, going to the Baltimore Ravens. And oh baby, this one gets me excited. I love what the Ravens do every year with the plan of how to attack the draft and how to use their resources and the type of players that they bring in. I'm not aware of any injuries or off-field concerns here, so I'm assuming that Darius Washington went undrafted because of the negatives that you heard throughout the draft process, and those are real. He's only 5'8", 180 pounds, and ran at 4'6" at TCU's Pro Day, so he's far from a physical specimen, but this guy can frickin' play. He might have had the best instincts of any safety in this draft. His acceleration to get to the ball is much better than his 40 time would indicate. He's a versatile piece in the secondary, and he plays so much bigger than his size would tell you. There were 20 safeties drafted and 259 players overall, obviously. Washington was my 6th ranked safety and my 70th overall prospect. I get the size concerns, but unless there are some issues that I'm not aware of, this makes no sense to me. I'm not totally sure where exactly the Ravens want to play him, because they really like the safety tandem in base in Chuck Clark and Deshaun Elliott. But guess what? They rarely are in base. Whether it's putting Washington in the slot against shifty receivers, when you want to keep Marlon Humphrey on the outside in certain matchups, since starting nickelback Tavon Young hasn't been able to stay healthy these last couple of years, or when they put 3 safeties on the field, where Washington can really fulfill any task and gives them that versatility the defensive coordinator Wink Martindale loves so much. I'm obviously not saying that he's as good as Tyrann Mathieu coming out of college, but check out their athletic numbers. Mathieu was 6 pounds heavier and about a 10th of a second faster in the 40, but Washington beat him pretty much across the board other than that. So I really think the concerns are overblown here. And we're going to stay with defense for the next several picks here, as we're talking about another player who just made him a top 100 overall big board, and Dylan Moses, the linebacker out of Alabama, going to Jacksonville. This is the first name on my list where I know there were some concerns about the medical reports. Dylan Moses was looked at as a first-round pick heading into his junior campaign, but ended up missing the whole season with a torn ACL, which he later revealed he was playing through in 2020 as well partially. And you saw some hesitancy on tape, I thought, when you look at last year. However, I certainly didn't think that he would go totally undrafted, because he was still a very good player for a national championship winning Alabama squad. He can have a tough time disengaging from blocks at times, and doesn't deliver a ton of impact at contact, but he also displays excellent patience and quickness to move around blocks, and he's a really easy mover in space as a coverage defender. So purely based on tape and the praise that you hear from teammates as well as coaches around the Alabama program, this should have been a pick in the middle rounds, even with that knee injury, unless there's some bone-on-bone action or something that I'm not aware of. When I look at the Jaguars depth chart, they brought in Joe Schobert to play Mike Backer for them last year, and he played fairly well, considering the holes that they had in Jacksonville and the things that he had to clean up. While Miles Jack, to me, is one of the best players that nobody really talks about. Outside of those two, the only guy likely getting extended playing time on defense for them will be Shaquille Quarterman, who is more of a pure inside thumper and blitzer. I believe Moses presents a little bit of a different skill set, and while we do have to still see how exactly a new defensive coordinator Joe Cullen wants to deploy his personnel coming over from Baltimore, they will probably stick with an even front on base downs at least, because they have so many guys to fit that front. So Moses could be the starting Sam in 4-3 sets, or at least be on the field for a lot of the passing downs because of his ability to cover ground in that regard. And now let's talk about one of the more criticized teams every year in the Las Vegas Raiders. Signing Darius Stills, the interior defensive lineman out of West Virginia. The Raiders do things a little bit different to everybody out there, it seems like. Not only with their surprise draft picks in the first round, but also with the players that they let walk or even cut at times. The defensive line in particular is where they don't really show a clear vision necessarily, letting Malik Collins walk in free agency and flat out cutting Maurice Hurst, but they're not bringing in any clear replacements for free technique. At this point, it looks like they want to move former 49ers third overall pick Solomon Thomas inside, where he also had his most success as a pass rusher, but in terms of true interior defensive linemen, Javian Hawkins and Quinton Jefferson are the only ones that they can rely upon currently. I actually had them taking Alabama's defensive tackle Christian Barmore 17th overall, but instead they shocked everybody with drafting his former teammate and offensive tackle Alex Leatherwood. While they ended up having a solid draft overall, I thought, they didn't add any help on the defensive interior. However, they might have gotten lucky that West Virginia's Darius Stills didn't receive a call until they asked him to sign as an undrafted free agent. Stills has that slashing style of play, but with a thick frame and primarily having played nose tackle for the Mountaineers, I believe he offers some versatility across the front, but just getting upfield in the B-gap with his quickness, where his rather reckless style of play isn't as much of an issue, because he would have the role of a disruptor in the Gus Bradley defense, makes a lot of sense for me. He may not officially start, but I could see him play close to as many snaps as anybody on the interior defensive line for the Silver and Black, and outside of the defensive ends that they want to move inside on passing downs maybe, be their most productive interior rusher. Now we move on from the defensive interior to the edge, with Hamilcar Rashed from Oregon State going to the New York Jets. When you look at the Jets draft class as a whole, and it's a pretty good one, other than the fact that they gave up 2 third-round picks in order to move up for guard Elijah Vera-Tucker from USC, when the offensive line dropped as a whole anyway. The one position that they didn't address at all, which was very surprising to me, especially looking at the staff that they have built up, is edge rusher. They attacked the secondary hard, but consistent pass rush from the outside has arguably been the biggest thing missing for this team for over a decade now. They did spend big on Carl Lawson for agency, and found themselves somebody in Bryce Huff, who I pointed out a year ago as an impact UDFA, who couldn't be part of that rotation, but the group as a whole is still rather underwhelming. Fortunately for them, I think they might have found another guy who can help them out in that regard. Hamilcar Rashed is somebody who was looked at as a potential top 50 pick ahead of this past season, since he was coming off an incredible junior year when he led the nation with 22.5 tackles for loss and he recorded 14 sacks. His stock fell tremendously after recording only 2 TFLs and no sacks in 7 games this past season, but you have to consider the limited preparation in this COVID year and the fact he simply didn't look nearly as dynamic, having added some weight. While I'll never consider a true number 1 pass rusher or anything like that, when you go back to the 2019 tape, there are certainly things to like here. In terms of the length and quickness as a rusher, the ability to lock out in the run game, and the agility that he showed in different zone drops. I thought he was more of a natural fit as a 3-4 outside linebacker, but I'd expect the Jets to either start Vinny Curry as the base end, or maybe even move Trill Williams out there, because of the guys that they have on the interior. So Rashed likely won't start, but with the pressure that Gang Green can provide up the middle, having a long, speedy guy on the edge, like Rashed, to clean up sacks after quarterbacks get flushed out wide, that makes a lot of sense to me. And that brings us to a final defender off this list, in Shakur Brown, the cornerback out of Michigan State, going to Pittsburgh. I don't think people talk enough about what the Steelers lost this offseason, with 3 starters on the offensive line moving on, Bud Dupree on the edge, and arguably the top nickelback in all of football, and Mike Hilton. There were reports about his likely replacement in Cam Sutton, also wanting to get traded, so that's kind of a dicey situation. So getting a slot corner in the draft would have made that decision a lot easier, but Pittsburgh might have found the solution after Saturday was wrapped up, when they gave Michigan State's Shakur Brown a call. Brown may not have elite physical tools to match some of the top receivers in the league who get moved inside, but the Steelers play a ton of zone coverage anyway, and he possesses a lot of desirable qualities for that role. He plays pissed off, he can redirect receivers off the line, shows good awareness in shallow zones, but then also excellent ball skills when he has to carry guys down the seams, and he plays really tough when it comes to setting the edge in the run game. The Steelers also drafted cornerback/safety Trey Norwood out of Oklahoma in the 7th round, who will be competing for that starting nickel spot, but when you watch him go up against some of the top receivers in the country during Senior Bowl week, he certainly doesn't offer more in man coverage, and I personally prefer Brown, who is somebody whose style of play will be greatly appreciated in Pittsburgh. Plus, even if the Steelers keep Sutton, they could at least deploy Brown in the slot in long yardage situations, and with the experience on the outside as well, he's somebody that they want to carry on game day, I believe. And now let's talk about the final guy here, in Briley Moore, the tight end out of Kansas State, going to the Tennessee Titans. First of all, there were 11 tight ends selected within the first 5 rounds of the draft. Moore was my tight end 9, and I actually felt bad almost for not having him a spot or 2 higher among a pretty weak tight end class. But there were 2 other guys among my top 10 at the position that didn't hear their names called either, and Ole Miss's Kenny Yeboah, who I already referenced, and Matt Bushman out of BYU, even though with him you can kind of get it because of the injuries that he's had. And I thought there was a big drop-off after those guys. But it was a breath of fresh air after so many guys at the position who all looked the same to me and didn't really excite me. The former Northern Iowa standout was limited to just 228 receiving yards last season at Kansas State, but he can really drop his hips, getting in and out of his breaks, plus he offers some juice after the catch. And at 6'4", 250 pounds, this guy really gets after it in the run game, lining up at H-back or in-line and moving defenders off the ball with relentless leg drive. I looked at him as kind of a budget version of Notre Dame's Tommy Tremble, in terms of a nasty, versatile blocker with some untapped potential as a receiver. I believe he will be an immediate replacement for Jonnu Smith, who they just lost to New England, which decided to pay him an average annual salary of $12.5 million. There's certainly a drop-off from Jonnu, especially in terms of the speed as a receiver and the versatility to play away from the box, but they got Moore for free and pay him about 5% of Smith's salary, so that's definitely a good value. And that's going to wrap up the list. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a couple of friends who want to stay engaged with the NFL and college football throughout the offseason. Plus, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments about this list and maybe some content that you want to see from me this offseason. I'll be working my way through the rosters of all 32 NFL teams and look at the holes that they may want to still fill. Make sure to check out my draft recap, which there's a link down below in the description for that, and so are my social media handles if you want to stay engaged with me. I got divisional draft breakdowns coming up, starting next week, where I look at every single player that was drafted, how they fit within their new team, and how those teams did as a whole. So until then, see you later. Peace!